From the earliest moments I can remember, my life seemed to revolve around the echo of a single word that became more like a curse than just a description: useless. It was not shouted in anger only, nor whispered in disappointment alone, but carved into my existence through repetition, through the casual cruelty of those who were supposed to lift me up, guide me, and give me the strength to face the world. I was born into a house where my laughter was often silenced, where my small victories went unnoticed, and where my failures were magnified 100 times over. It didn't matter whether I was too young to understand the complexities of life, whether I was still learning, whether my mistakes were natural parts of growing up. To them, those mistakes weren't steps, they were proof that I was nothing but a burden, a shadow, an extra weight on their shoulders that they did not want to carry. I would watch other children being celebrated, receiving hugs for the smallest achievements, while in my home, I learned quickly that affection was conditional, and pride was absent. Every time I tried to show them that I could do something, anything, there was a harsh reminder waiting for me. A misplaced word, a forgotten chore, a grade that wasn't perfect, a moment of clumsiness, all of it seemed to confirm what they had already decided about me. They didn't see a child struggling to grow, they saw evidence of my supposed uselessness, as though the very act of my being alive was a failure they had to endure. These words, spoken so often, stopped being external judgments and began to seep into me like poison, shaping the way I looked at myself, the way I stood in the world, the way I dared to dream. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was born if I could never be enough for them. I would imagine myself as someone else, a child who was clever, talented, graceful, anything but me. But the reality was always waiting in the morning, their voices reminding me before I even had a chance to prove otherwise. The word useless was not just an insult, it became my identity in their eyes, and eventually, I feared it was my identity in truth. When you hear something long enough, especially from the people you love most, you begin to wear it like a second skin. You begin to question not just what you do, but who you are. In school, when teachers encouraged me, I couldn't believe them. Their praise felt like lies, like polite gestures that would eventually fade once they discovered what my parents already knew. With friends, I laughed and played, but there was always a hollowness behind my smile, a fear that if they looked closely enough, they would see what my parents saw: someone not worthy of love, not capable of greatness, not even worthy of basic respect. And so I grew quieter, more withdrawn, hiding behind walls that I thought could shield me from more pain, but all they did was keep me imprisoned in my own thoughts built on the foundation of those cruel words. What hurt the most was not just the label, but the intention behind it. A child looks at their parents for guidance, for acceptance, for the reassurance that even in failure, they are loved. Instead, I received coldness, sarcasm, the sting of comparisons. "Why can't you be more like them?" they would say, pointing at cousins, neighbors, even strangers. "Look how successful they are, and look at you, good for nothing." Each comparison drove the knife deeper, because it wasn't about encouraging me to do better, it was about reminding me that no matter how hard I tried, I would never measure up. Their words were not meant to inspire, but to belittle, to reduce me until. There were moments I tried to fight against it. I studied harder, I worked on things quietly, hoping one day to bring them something they could be proud of. But even then, their reactions were dismissive. A good grade meant nothing, it was expected. A small achievement was brushed aside as luck or coincidence. Nothing I did seemed to penetrate the wall of disappointment that surrounded them. It felt as though they had decided on the story of my life before I even had a chance to live it, and that story was destined to be one of failure. They had written me off before I had the chance to write myself in. Growing up under this constant barrage left marks that went deeper than I could explain. It wasn't just the pain of hearing the word, it was the slow erosion of self-worth, the way it stripped away my confidence until even the smallest tasks seemed overwhelming. I questioned every move I made, terrified of making another mistake that would confirm their beliefs. I doubted my choices, my abilities, even my right to exist in spaces where others thrived. The voice in my head was no longer mine, it was theirs, echoing endlessly, a reminder that no matter where I went, I carried their judgment with me. But even in that darkness, a spark remained, though I didn't realize it at the time. For every insult, there was a hidden hunger in me to prove them wrong, to find some meaning in myself that they refused to see. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but the pain they inflicted became fuel, buried deep within me. And while the wounds were raw, while the words cut deeper, with every repetition, something inside me whispered that I was more than what they called me. That whisper was faint, almost drowned out by their voices, but it was there, waiting for the day it would grow louder, waiting for the day it would remind me that being called useless did not mean I truly was. The emotional scars left behind by constant rejection and belittling are not the kind that heal with. I remember moments when I would run to them with a drawing I had made, colors smudged on paper, lines uneven, but filled with the kind of pride only a child can feel. Instead of encouragement, there was a scoff, a wave of the hand, a muttered complaint about wasting time. What should have been a celebration of creativity turned into another reminder that my efforts had no worth. That is what rejection does when it comes from those closest to you. It teaches you not to try, it whispers to you that no matter how much effort you pour into something, the result will never matter. It tells you that your existence itself is a mistake, and you begin to carry that message into every corner of your life. Belittling was even worse, because it was not just about dismissing what I did, it was about mocking who I was. They didn't only reject my actions, they laughed at my being. I was too slow, too clumsy, too distracted, too naive, too sensitive, always too much of something or too little of something else, never enough in the ways that mattered to them. And the more they reminded me of these flaws, the more I started to see myself through their eyes. I no longer believed in my own abilities. I questioned my worth at every turn. I would shrink in rooms full of people, afraid to speak, because I had been taught my words had no weight, my thoughts had no value, my presence was more a burden than a gift. The scars became chains, invisible but unbreakable, keeping me tethered to a version of myself that was built from their criticism. In classrooms, I would hesitate to raise my hand even when I knew the answer, because somewhere in the back of my mind, their voices reminded me that I was probably wrong, probably foolish, probably just wasting everyone's time. With friends, I would laugh along, but never too loudly, never too confidently, because I didn't believe my joy was worth sharing. Even in solitude, I carried their rejection like a mirror I couldn't put down, a mirror that reflected. The worst part of such scars is how they twist love into something painful. Every child craves affection, and when you do not receive it from the people who are meant to give it unconditionally, you begin to chase it in the wrong places, desperate for approval, desperate for even a scrap of validation. I found myself doing things not because I wanted to, but because I hoped someone, anyone, would finally look at me and say I mattered. But the problem with scars is that they bleed into your perception. Even when someone does show you kindness, you struggle to believe it is genuine. The rejection you lived with becomes so ingrained that you expect it everywhere, even when it is not there. I carried this weight into adolescence, where the wounds only grew sharper. Every insult replayed in my head, every moment of belittling became the lens through which I viewed myself. I became my own critic, repeating their words to myself long after they had stopped speaking. I told myself I was not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, until I didn't need them to say it anymore because I had learned to say it on their behalf. That is the cruelest effect of emotional scars. They do not remain external, they take root within you, so deeply that you begin to betray yourself. Even in moments of success, when I achieved something small, the scars whispered doubts. Was it really success, or just luck? Would they even care if they knew? Did it even matter? The joy of accomplishment was fleeting, immediately overshadowed by the fear of rejection that had been planted in me from the start. I began to sabotage myself, pulling back before I could fail, avoiding risks before I could be mocked, staying small so that I would not give anyone an excuse to remind me of how useless I was. The scars didn't just hurt, they dictated my choices, they dictated my future, they dictated the story I believed about myself. And yet, even within the weight of these scars, there was a strange kind of strength forming quietly, silently, like a seed buried deep in dark soil. The very pain that broke me was also shaping me, teaching me to see the cracks in others, teaching me to understand rejection when it lived in someone else's eyes. My scars gave me a sensitivity I did not ask for, but one I could not ignore. Still, at the time, I could not recognize it as strength. All I saw was damage, all I felt was shame, all I carried was the echo of their voices telling me I would never be enough. The scars became stories, etched into the way I carried myself, in the slump of my shoulders, in the hesitation in my speech, in the way I avoided eye contact. People saw only the surface, but beneath it was a battlefield of old wounds, some still bleeding, some scabbed over, none fully healed. And while time moved forward, those scars remained, reminders of a childhood where love was withheld, where approval was scarce, where rejection and belittling were daily meals I was forced to swallow. Even now, when I think back, I can still feel the sting, as fresh as the day it happened. The memory of being dismissed, the ache of being compared, the hollow silence of not being seen, they stay with me, they shape me, they live inside me. And though the world outside may never see them, I know they are there, written across my heart in lines that only I can read, scars that whisper of the pain of rejection and the cruelty of belittling, scars that I did not choose, but that became mine to carry. The moment their need turned me into their only hope was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, because for the first time in my life, the balance of power shifted, and the people who had spent years dismissing me, criticizing me, calling me useless, suddenly looked at me with desperation in their eyes. It wasn't love, it wasn't pride, it wasn't even recognition of my worth, it was need, raw and undeniable, a need. At first, I couldn't process it. The same parents who had told me time and again that I was worthless, who had made me believe I was nothing more than a burden, were now telling me I was the key to their survival. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to flip the story, to place me in a position where their lives hung in my hands. For so long, I had been the one begging for a shred of affection, for acknowledgement, for even the smallest gesture that I mattered, and now it was them who were pleading, them who were afraid, them who finally saw me not as useless, but as necessary. The irony was sharp enough to cut, and I could feel it slicing through every scar they had left on me. When I walked into the hospital room and saw them lying there, frail and pale, with machines humming softly around them, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to cry, to rush to their side, to comfort them, because no matter what they had done, they were still my parents. Another part of me wanted to turn around and walk out, to let them taste the emptiness they had forced me to swallow all those years, to let them see what it felt like to be unwanted, unvalued, unseen. Standing there, I realized just how deep their words had gone, because even in the face of their suffering, I could not forget the years of suffering they had inflicted on me. The moment they needed me was the same moment I realized I finally had something I had never had before, choice. I watched their eyes as they looked at me, no longer filled with disdain, no longer filled with superiority. They looked at me the way someone looks at water in a desert, the way someone looks at light in the middle of darkness. For once, I was not invisible. For once, my existence carried weight. But it wasn't because they suddenly loved me or finally understood me, it was because they needed what was inside me. My kidney, my blood, my body had become the answer to their prayers, and that knowledge sank into me like. Every word they had ever thrown at me echoed in my mind as I sat there, listening to the doctors explain the procedure. I remembered being told I was good for nothing, that I would never achieve anything, that my existence was a mistake. And now, those same parents were listening just as carefully as I was, their hope tied to the idea that I would agree, that I would save them. There was a strange satisfaction in that moment, not because I enjoyed their suffering, but because for the first time, I saw the truth, they had been wrong about me all along. I was not useless. In fact, I was the only one who could give them what they needed. The irony burned in my chest, mingling with years of pain, creating a storm I could barely contain. I wanted to ask them why. Why had they never seen me until now? Why had they spent so much time tearing me down, only to depend on me in their most desperate hour? I wanted them to feel the weight of their words, to understand the damage they had caused, to admit that they had been cruel, unfair, blind. But as I looked at their faces, lined with fear and exhaustion, I realized that no answer they could give would ever erase the years of scars they had left behind. Nothing they said could undo the nights I cried alone, the days I hid my shame, the years I believed I was nothing. Their need did not erase their cruelty, but it did change everything. The moment they needed me was the moment I realized I had power, not the kind that comes from control or revenge, but the kind that comes from finally being seen, finally being acknowledged, even if it was for selfish reasons. They could no longer deny my importance, no longer dismiss me as a burden, because their lives quite literally depended on me. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. For years, I had wished for their validation, and here it was, not in the form of praise or love, but in the form of dependence. It was not the validation I had dreamed of, but it was undeniable. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me every time I entered the room, waiting, hoping, fearing that I would say no. I could sense their unspoken apologies, weak attempts at kindness that felt foreign on their tongues. They tried to soften their tone, to speak gently, to treat me with a respect they had never given me before, but I could hear the desperation beneath it, the fear of losing what they needed. And in those moments, I wondered if they finally understood what it felt like to be on the other side of rejection, to live with the knowledge that someone else's decision could determine your worth, your survival, your future. The irony of it all wrapped around me like a cloak, heavy but fitting. For years, I had been the powerless one, the one who was diminished, overlooked, dismissed. Now, the very people who had held power over me were at my mercy, their lives entwined with my choice. It was not revenge in the traditional sense, but it was justice of a kind, a shift in the balance that made me see myself in a new light. I was no longer useless, no longer invisible. I was essential, necessary, vital. And whether I chose to give them what they wanted or not, that truth would remain. The inner conflict of whether to help them, or let them face the cruelty they had poured into my life was unlike any battle I had ever fought within myself, because it was not just about a decision in the present, it was about years of pain crashing against the sudden power I now held. On one side was the voice of the child inside me, the one who had begged for their love, who had cried silently in the dark, who had dreamed of a day when they would finally look at me with pride. That child wanted to help, not because they deserved it, but because I still longed for the connection I had been denied all my life. On the other side was the voice hardened by years of rejection, the voice that remembered every insult, every comparison, every time they had told me I was worthless. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and feel the tug of both sides pulling me apart. The thought of giving them what they needed filled me with exhaustion, because it meant once again putting their needs above the pain they had caused me. Why should I sacrifice my body, my health, for people who had never once sacrificed their pride to show me love? Why should I bleed for them when they never shed a single tear for me? The anger surged in me like fire, hot and uncontrollable, and I imagined the satisfaction of saying no, of watching them realize that the child they had dismissed as useless had finally found a voice strong enough to deny them the very thing they wanted most. But then there were moments when I thought of something else, something deeper than my anger. I thought about humanity, about compassion, about whether helping them would mean I was weak or whether it would mean I was stronger than they had ever been. Would refusing them make me just like them, cold and cruel, unable to see beyond my own wounds? Or would helping them mean I had broken the cycle, that I had proven to myself that I was not defined by their cruelty, that I could rise above it? The questions tangled in my mind until I could hardly tell where one ended and another began. Every time I saw them lying there in that hospital bed, frail and diminished, I felt the weight of my choice pressing down on me. Their faces no longer carried the stern disapproval I had known all my life, but a quiet fear, a vulnerability I had never witnessed. And as much as I wanted to hold on to my anger, I could not stop myself from seeing them as human beings, flawed and broken in their own way. But immediately, another thought would strike. Where was their humanity when I needed it? Where was their compassion when I was the one hurting? Where were their gentle words when I was the child yearning for comfort? The conflict tore me apart piece by piece. At times, I wanted to walk away, to let them face the consequences of their actions, to finally understand what it felt like to be abandoned. At other times, I wanted to give them what they asked for, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to free myself from the burden of hatred. I wrestled with questions of morality, of identity, of justice. Was it justice to deny them, or was it justice to give and show them the strength they had never acknowledged? Was I punishing them by walking away, or was I punishing myself by holding on to anger so tightly? I thought about the years that had shaped me, the countless moments when their words had cut me down, and I wondered if helping them would undo all of that or if it would only make me feel smaller again. Would I be giving them the satisfaction of once again using me, or would I be reclaiming control over my own story by making the choice myself? That was the crux of it, choice. For once in my life, the decision was mine, not theirs. They could not force me, could not belittle me into obedience. The power rested entirely with me, and that realization was both liberating and terrifying. There were days when I imagined telling them no, looking into their eyes and watching the fear deepen, watching them finally experience the sting of rejection they had inflicted on me. I imagined the silence that would follow, the way they would realize that their words had consequences, that the child they had crushed had grown into someone strong enough to let them fall. But then, almost in the same breath, I would imagine the look of relief if I said yes, the way their tears might finally fall, the way they might, even in their last moments, acknowledge that I had given them something no one else could. The conflict was not just about them, it was about me. It was about who I wanted to be, about whether I would let their cruelty define me forever or whether I would step beyond it. Did I want to carry the weight of revenge, of letting them die knowing I could have saved them? Or did I want to carry the weight of sacrifice, of giving a part of myself to people who had never given me anything in return? Neither path was free of pain, and that was the hardest truth of all. No matter what I chose, scars would remain, but the kind of scars depended on which path I took. I questioned everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and family. I wondered if forgiveness was even possible, or if this decision would be a twisted form of it. I wondered if walking away would mean I was finally standing up for myself, or if it would mean I had let bitterness consume me. I wondered if helping them would give me peace, or if it would reopen wounds I had spent years trying to close. The inner battle raged on, relentless and merciless, until I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Every look they gave me, every word they spoke in soft, trembling tones, added fuel to the fire inside me. Their desperation pulled at my heart, but my memories pulled harder, dragging me back to every insult, every rejection, every moment of pain. I could not escape the duality of it, love and hate, compassion and anger, humanity and revenge, all colliding within me at once. And as I stood on the edge of that decision, I realized that no matter what I chose, it would define me, not just in their eyes, but in my own, because this was the moment that would reveal who I truly was beneath the scars. The power shift from being a helpless child to the one in control did not happen suddenly. It crept into my life in small, almost imperceptible ways until the moment arrived when it stood fully formed before me, undeniable and overwhelming. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of their authority, their voices louder than my own, their judgments heavier than any truth I could hold on to. I was the child who lowered my eyes, who silenced my thoughts, who accepted their words as law because I had no choice but to survive in a world where they dictated every detail of my worth. I was powerless, trapped in their narrative, molded by their scorn. But standing in that hospital, faced with their trembling need,